ended off. We continued on. So we ended off with the shaila that Abaya asked from Rabbi, and the shaila that he asked was, does the person who's mevatel his rishus have to be mevatel to everybody, or can he just be mevatel to one of the people? So that was the shaila that Abaya asked from Rabbi. Chamisha sheshurim b'chatzar achas v'shakach echad mehen v'lo yiriv kishu mevatel rishusai tzarich levatel l'chal echad v'echad oiloi. And Rabbi Paskins right off the bat that you have to be mevatel to everybody. It's actually an interesting shaila, machlokes in the Rishonim. Rashi holds it's enough to say, "I'm mevatel marshus lekulchem." Into general, you can generally say, "I'm doing it to everybody." I don't have to say I'm doing it to Moshe, and to Yankel, and to Beryl, and to Shmuel. But the other Rishonim learn he has to specify each one. They bring a raya from the davening that we say in Rosh Hashanah. We say Meloich al kala olam kuloi b'chvarecha. What's wrong with Meloich al kala olam? Why Meloich al kala olam kuloi? The answer is because they hold that if you just say I'm mevatel my chelik in the chater to everyone without specifying everyone, then it might mean rubai kakuloi, lavka for every single person. And with Eruvin, it has to be every single person, not only just to the right. So the Gemara brought a raya on a brisa with many different cases about different people being mevatel their chelik in the chater to others. And the raya was from the first item in the brisa, where the brisa said echad shalai iriv noishin rishusai leechad she'iriv. One person who didn't make an eruv can give over his rishus to someone who did make an eruv. Well, if there is someone who did make an eruv and there's someone who didn't make it and who didn't make an eruv, there must be a third party involved, because who else was the echad she'iriv ma'arav with? He wasn't ma'arav with the guy who shalai iriv, because the guy shalai iriv didn't make an eruv. So there must be three people here, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. And you see that he only has to give his rishus leechad she'iriv, which is a raya against Rabbah, that you don't have to give over your rishus to everybody. And on that, the Gemara answered, maybe it's speaking where at the beginning Reuben and Shimon made an eruv, Levi wasn't part of the eruv, and then maybe Shimon died. So by the time Levi was being mevatel his rishus, there were no longer two people to be mevatel his rishus to. There was only one person to be mevatel his rishus to. But in fact, two people were there. Then avada, you'd have to be mevatel his rishus to both of the people. So the Gemara said, if you're going to learn that the case of the Bryce is speaking, where there's someone there who died, then it's going to be shver from the Seifa, because the Seifa has a case that the Seifa has a case of the Gemara. One person who made an eruv cannot give his rishus to a person who didn't make an eruv. Well, if the person who made an eruv, let's say Reuben made an eruv with Shimon, and the Brash is saying that Reuben cannot give over his rights to Levi because Reuben and Shimon both have to give over their rights to Levi. Well, if Shimon died, if that's how you're learning that Shimon died over Shabbos, so then why can't Echad She'iriv give his rishus to anybody else? On that, the Gemara said, Rabbah said, you're right. The Sefer is speaking where Shimon didn't die, but the Reisha is speaking where Shimon did die. And that's how Rabbah learns Hachadisa v'Hachadisa, which is a little bit difficult to understand. But this is where we have to Teda. I'm going to prove to you, Zok Rabbah, that I'm right. That in fact, you have to be mevatel your rishus to every person individually. And in the Reisha, the reason why it worked is because Shimon died, and therefore Levi only has to be mevatel his rishus to Reuven. But in the Sefer, both Reuben and Shimon remained alive, and therefore they both have to be mevatel their rishus to Levi. Teda, the Katani Sefer, the Reisha. The Sefer of the Reisha says, and now the Gemara is going to go and analyze all of the different cases in the Brisa. So the Sefer of the Reisha says, Ushnaim Shaloi Yirvu, two people who did not make an eruv, Noisnin Rishusan Lishnaim She'irvu. Two people who didn't make an eruv can give their rishus to two people who did make an eruv. So what that would mean is if Reuven and Shimon made an Eruv together, and Levi and Yehuda did not make an Eruv, so the halach is the two people that didn't make the Eruv, Levi and Yehuda, who didn't make an Eruv, they could be mevatel their das to Reuven and Shimon. It doesn't say that they could be mevatel their das to Reuven or Shimon. The Brisa says they could be mevatel their das they could be mevatel their rights to the chaser to Reuven and Shimon. Lishnayim l'echad loy. So Rabbi says, I have a raya from another portion of this very same brisa to my halacha, that whenever there's multiple people involved, and you want to be mevatel your rishus in the chater to the multiple people, you have to be mevatel your rishus in the chater to all of them. You can't just be mevatel your rishus in the chater to one of them. So that would be a pretty strong raya to Rabbi Abaye, who had it for a suffix. How is he going to understand this part of the brisa? Abaye Amar, my lebeis le'echad mebeis. It doesn't really mean that you have to be mevatel your rishus in the chater to both people, to Reuven and Shimon, who made an Eruv together. Rather, it's enough if you're mevatel your rights to the chater to one of the two. Frag the Gemara, Abaye, how could you argue that? If what the brisa means is that if the brisa means that Levi and Yehuda only have to be mevatel their rights in the chater to either Reuven or Shimon, well, that's what it should have said. So the Gemara kasha. So it's not a tiyufta, it's a kasha. Why did Brisa use such a lashon? Now we'll go analyze another case in the Brisa. Echad shelo yirev. Someone who didn't make an eruv, noishin rishusai le'echad she'eruv. So this was the sefer. So Reuven and Shimon made an eruv. Levi did not join the eruv. So echad shelo yirev, Levi noishin rishusai le'echad she'eruv can give his rishus over to one of the people who made the eruv. Labaya de Isay. According to Abaya, it's speaking where both Reuven and Shimon are alive, and Levi did not make an eruv. Levi only has to be mevatel his chelik of the chotzer to one of the two, to Reuven or Shimon. The Kamash Malon, the Ein Tzarech Levatel Rishus L'Cholechad V'Echad. And Abaya will extract from this lashon of the Brisa that you don't have to be mevatel your rishus to everybody else in the chotzer. As long as you're mevatel rishus to one of the people who were ma'ariv, that will allow them all to carry. The Rabbah, he had to learn the havumis. He'll have to learn that the case of the Reisha, this is the original case that the Gemara asked the kasha on Rabbah from, and Rabbah explained that the case is the reason why Levi only had to be mevatel his rishus in the chotzer to either Reuven or to Shimon is because the other person had died already. V'loy gozer zimnin v'isei. And we're not geyser that even if Reuven, let's say there's Reuven and Shimon who made the eruv, and Shimon died, and now Levi only has to be mevatel his rishus in the chotzer to Reuven. You're not geyser that the Balter was once a Shimon here at the beginning of Shabbos, and now he's not here. We won't allow them to be mevatel at all. We won't allow Levi to be mevatel his chelik in the chotzer to Reuven, because in the case where Shimon survived, in the case where Shimon was alive, it wouldn't work for Levi to be mevatel his rishus in the chotzer only to Reuven. So because of that, even if Shimon dies, we won't let Levi be mevatel his chelik in the chotzer to Reuven alone. And then they come to the next case of the Brisa. Ushnaim she'irvu, two people who made an eruv, noistin rishusan la'echad shelo yirev. So Reuven and Shimon made an eruv together. Levi did not participate in the eruv. So Reuven and Shimon could be mevatel their rishus in the chotzer to Levi, so that Levi can carry. Pshita afreik the Gemara. That's a very pashut halacha. Why would you say that two people cannot be mevatel their chelik in the chotzer to somebody else? So tomorrow, Mal de Tema, you might think, even the loy irev, since Levi did not join in the eruv with Reuven and Shimon, liknasei, we cancel him, and we don't let him ever able to carry in the chotzer that Shabbos. We don't let him carry, we don't give him the remedy that Reuven and Shimon could be mevatel their chelik in the chotzer to him. Kamash Malon, that we do allow it, and therefore, even if a Levi didn't join in the Eruv originally as he should have, if Reuven and Shimon are mevatel their chelik in the chotzer to him, he could carry. And now comes the next case in the brayso. Ubei shalot yirvu, two people who did not make an Eruv, noistin rishuson l'shnayim she'irvu. So Reuven and Shimon made an Eruv together. Levi and Yehuda did not join. So the halach is Levi and Yehuda could be mevatel their chilokim to Reuven and Shimon. So how do we learn pshat of this? Rabba, according to Rabba, who learns you have to be mevatel to everyone. Tana seifa l'b'yareisha. You see from here that you have to be mevatel to both people, because that's what the brayso says. The Levi and Yehuda have to be mevatel their chelik in the chotzer, both to Reuven and to Shimon, which is supporting Rabba's statement. And this is the place where Rabba brought the raya from earlier to his position, that you see that you have to be mevatel your chelik to both people who are remaining. La Abaye said it was lavdavka. And the reason why it's even said that case is Bei Shaloi Irvu, it's trichaloi. The chiddush is that the people who did not make an Eruv, so Kedai Chamina, Ligzar, Dilma Asal of Tulalahu. Now we know that if the two people who didn't make the Eruv, so Reuven and Shimon made an Eruv together, Levi and Yehuda did not make the Eruv, we know that Reuven and Shimon cannot be mevatel their chelik to Levi and Yehuda, because then there's still Levi and Yehuda that have not been ma'ariv, so they're still stuck without an Eruv. And the Gemara yesterday suggested to let Reuven and Shimon be mevatel their chelik to Levi and Yehuda, and then Levi will take his chelik and give it to Yehuda, so at least Yehuda gets it. On that, the Gemara said yesterday that doesn't work, because since when Reuven and Shimon were originally mevatel their chelik in the chotzer to Levi and Yehuda, it was ineffective. At that point, they were still separated. Levi and Yehuda were still separate; they still couldn't carry. Therefore, it doesn't work. So you might think, because of that, we also will say two people who didn't make an Eruv cannot be mevatel their chelik to those who didn't make an Eruv. Ligzer dilma asal of tulahu, because we're afraid if we let it go one way, people might do it the opposite way. Kamash alone, that you could do it. Two people who were not ma'ariv could be mevatel their chelik in the chotzer to two people who were ma'ariv. Oy le'echad shelo yir. Lamali, why do I need the brayso to tell me that two people who made an Eruv, that Reuven and Shimon who made an Eruv, that they could be mevatel l'chelik to Levi, a single person, shelo yir. Lamali. So kamal the tema hanamili heichad miktason irvu umiktason lo yirvu. You would have thought that when do you say that you could be mevatel? Is only if Reuven and Shimon made an Eruv together and Levi did not make an Eruv. But in the case where Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, nobody made an Eruv, you might think that you will not allow two people to be mevatel their rights in the chotzer to one person. So at least that one person should be able to carry. So you'll have a mina that liknesinu kedei shaloi tishtaka cheres Eruv kamash malon. If we let people completely avoid the concept of Eruv chetzeres and just say that two of the people will be mevatel their rights to one of the people, then technically you'll never need to use Eruv chetzeres. So you might think we wouldn't allow that to happen. Kamash malon, that we do. Now to the next case of the brayso. A person who did not make an Eruv cannot give his rishos to someone who did not make an Eruv. So again, Reuven and Shimon made an Eruv together. They cannot be mevatel their rishos to Levi who did not make an Eruv. No, what it means is ein echad she'irei. Reuven and Shimon made an Eruv together. Now they want to be mevatel their rishos to Levi. If Reuven and Shimon both do that, yes, everybody agrees it'll work. But echad she'irei, if only Reuven does it, wouldn't allow it. So le'abaye tana sefer l'giration. Abaye uses this to prove that in fact this case is only relevant where Reuven and Shimon are both alive. Because if Shimon died, then it's only one and one, and then of course it would work. So this is where Abaye brought his raya that the brayso must be speaking where Reuven and Shimon are both alive, and if only Reuven is going to be mevatel his chelik to Levi, but Shimon doesn't, then Levi still will not be able to carry. And the Rabbah According to Rabbah, we learned that this is speaking where Shimon didn't die, even though in the first case of the Brisa, he learned that Shimon did die. So what's the chiddush of this case then? I did the Tana Reisha, Tana Nami Seifa. Since the Reisha used such a case, the Seifa uses such a case. So Rashi says, I did the Tana Reisha, Echad Shalai Irev, Noishin L'Rishusai, La'echad She'irev, Tana Hach Seifa, the Ibchaloi. But really, the oilam ratio with the havel miss the sefer b'deisnu, so it's not really such a chiddush. It's just offering a parallel case to the case of the ratio. Talking more about it. The ein shnayim she'irvu noisnu rishusam l'shnayim shleir. So Reuven and Shimon, they made an eruv. They cannot be mavatal their chelek to Levi and Yehuda, who did make an eruv, who did not make an eruv, and that again. We already discussed that wouldn't work because when Levi and Yehuda get it, Levi and Yehuda still don't have an Eruv amongst each other. Hasul Amali, why do we need a brisa to repeat that case? That's more like tricha. The botal echad minayu lechavre. Of course, we're speaking in a case where after Reuven and Shimon were mevatel the chelik of the chater to Levi and Yehuda, then Levi turned around and was mevatel whatever he had to Yehuda. So now everything is consolidated in the rishus of Yehuda. You might think at least now Yehuda has all the rights, so he should be able to carry the chutzner. Kamash malon even the bottle. You saw the since at the time where Reuven and Shimon was mevatel their chelik in the chutzner to Levi and Yehuda, both Levi and Yehuda, neither one had any type of heter to carry in this chutzner. Therefore, it doesn't work at all. Therefore, loy. The next case of the brisa was ein shnayim shelo yirvu. If you have Reuven and Shimon who did not make an error, and you have Levi and Yehuda who didn't make an error, so if Reuven and Shimon are mevatel their chelik in the chotzer to Levi and Yehuda, it doesn't work. Again, that's exactly the same case as if Reuven and Shimon did make an error and they gave it to Levi. It wouldn't work. It's the same problem. It wouldn't work because whenever Levi and Yehuda receive what they get from Reuven and Shimon, they still cannot do anything with it. They still can't carry with it. So the army what if when Reuven and Shimon were mevatel their chelik to Levi and Yehuda, they didn't just do it stamazoi, they specified, we're giving you the right to be maknit to, so let's say if it's Levi and Yehuda, we're giving you the right to be maknit to Yehuda. So we built that into our transaction, it still wouldn't work. And we need really what Duvi Menzelevsky spoke out yesterday, which is very important. This is not a shaila of Choshe Mishpat. When we're talking about this bittul harishos, it's not a Choshe Mishpat shaila. I think Shlomi mentioned it as well. Because if it's merely a shaila of Choshe Mishpat, of course, Levi, he was koine something, could sell whatever he was koine to Yehuda. But this isn't a real kinyan over here. This is all part of the Eruv Chaseris requirement. And Vibalt, when Levi and Yehuda got their chelik from Reuven and Shimon, it didn't create any heter to anybody. Therefore, there's no way that Chazal allow you to get a heter to carry by then taking the Jew up and passing it over. So it's really an Eruv dik halacha. Duvi, I just spoke out of Duvi. And last night, David Dayan was kind enough to take a snapshot of the parish from the Steinsaltz Gemara, and he speaks out clearly what you said, that we're not talking here Hilchos Choshe Mishpat, we're talking here Hilchos Eruvin, so it doesn't follow the same rules. And the shot is, Chazal said this is not acceptable to allow people to carry it.
That's a little problematic. If it's not, it has to be a Choshe Mishpat as well. Many halachas, for instance, heteriska, right? A heteriska, you can't say it's just a heteriska situation and doesn't apply. So a heteriska, it's
or mechiras chametz.
Or mechiras chametz, right?
David's asking, how can you say this is not a real transaction? How does it work for heteriska? How does it work for mechiras chametz? The answer is when you're dealing with mechiras chametz and heteriska, which are shilots of an iser daraisa, your mechira has to be a real mechira, otherwise you're going to be over deraisa. But here the whole requirement to make Eruv Chaseris was only a derabbanan anyway, to try to show that there's a difference between a shared space and a completely private space. So therefore, the Rabbanim made their own rules. We have a halacha that you always go lakula when it comes to shilas of Erev Chetzeres. So the Rabbanim are just trying to create a little bit of an awareness. Right. The whole thing is prescriptive. The whole thing is the Rabbanim just to show us, just to remind us that there's Hilchos Shabbos here. So therefore, they could make up their own rules, and the rules regarding Erev Chetzeres are not really bound to Choshen Mishpat. There's no kinyanim really. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following shaila: Yoirish mahu sheyevatal rishus. Could a Yoirish be mevatal rishus? So Rashi says Yoirish sheshakach aviv v'lo irev. So Reuven and Shimon were living in the same chutzner. They each had a house in the chutzner, and then and before Shabbos there was no erev made, and then on Shabbos Reuven died. So Reuven's son is now in his father's footsteps. Can he now be mevatel? If his father was alive, if Reuven was alive, Reuven would have been able to be mevatel his chelik of the chutzner to give to Shimon. So now that Reuven's child is alive, can Reuven's child do the same? So Rashi Yoish Shakachavim, V'lo Yiriv, and Umeis b'Shabbos, and the Reuven died on Shabbos, V'lo Bitul Rishusay, and he never was mevatel his rishus to Shimon. Mao Shivatel Yoirish, can Reuven's son stand in his father's footsteps? Now he owns whatever chelik his father had, and now he should be able to be mevatel. So why shouldn't he be able to? Well, the kinyan of a Yoirish, no one's making that. Doesn't that happen automatically? So the Yoirish for sure took possession of it on Shabbos, right? So that's not something that he did. That happens automatically. So the moment someone's father dies, so he yarshins. I don't think so. I don't think so can involve. Zok Moshe, Heicha, the boy la Ruben me'esmel. When do you say this whole concept of bittul works? As if the person who wants to be mevatel on Shabbos, had he wanted to make an erev on Friday, motzi ma'ariv. The father Reuven, he could have made an erev together with Shimon on Friday. So therefore, if he didn't do that, butuli nami motzi mevatel. He has now a right to be mevatel on Shabbos, meaning the ability to be mevatel your chelik of the chutzner is an extension of your ability to be able to make an erev before Shabbos. Aval hai this Yoirish, even the boy la Reuven me'esmo loy matzimar, the Yoirish of Reuven would not have had the option to create an erev before Shabbos because at that point he didn't own it yet. So therefore loy matzim mevatel, so he can't do bittul either. Oidilma Yoirish Karadavu, the same schus that his father had to be able to make a bittul on Shabbos, the Yoirish can do exactly the same thing. So let me just remember who the Shiloh was asked of. So Rav Nachman responded. I hold that the Yoirish stands exactly in the steps of who he arshed it from, and he wouldn't be able to be mevatel. But the Hani, the Beis Shmuel Tanu, those people from the Beis Medrash of Shmuel learned ein mevatel, that it would not work. So there's a machlokes, in fact, if a Yoirish could be mevatel. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's what the Hand of Shmuel. That's what the Hand of Shmuel. That's right. Ace effecting more. Zaklal. Kol shemuter l'miktzah Shabbos. And these words are going to remain cryptic until the Gemara explains them in a moment. So this is the rule. Kol shemuter l'miktzah Shabbos. Anytime something's mutter for part of Shabbos, mutter l'chol Shabbos. It'll be mutter for all of Shabbos. Kol shenesel l'miktzah Shabbos, nesel l'chol Shabbos. You see how these two statements at first glance are contradictory. Because anything that's mutter for a mitzvah Shabbos, by definition, is also for a mitzvah Shabbos. And in the beginning, the Brisa says, if it's a mutter mitzvah Shabbos, it's mutter for all Shabbos. Then the Brisa says, if it's also a mitzvah Shabbos, it's also for all Shabbos. And the only halacha that is not included in these rules is chutz mimevatel rishus, except for someone who's mevatel rishus. And indeed, that's pshat. Indeed, that will be pshat. So now the Gemara explains. Kol shehuter l'mikzah Shabbos muter l'chol Shabbos. What does that refer to? Zok the Gemara could go in Eruv derech HaPesach. Imagine if there's two chatzeres and there's a doorway in between them, and therefore they have a right to join together, make one big Eruv for both these two chatzeres. And that's what they did. They made an Eruv, and now Chatzar A and Chatzar B are joined, and all the residents can carry both in Chatzar A and Chatzar B. And then what happened in Nissan Pesach? On Shabbos, some house collapsed right near this entrance and blocked up the whole entrance with rubble. So now there is no more gateway in between the two chatzeres. So technically, their Eruv should be bottled. Now, if there's no gateway, so how anyway can they get something across? So Rashi says there might be a small hole in the wall you could pass something through. There are rudimentary ways, different ways we can get through. But the main gate that allowed these two chatzeres to join forces no longer exists. So, well, here the Eruv didn't collapse. Here the access from Chatzar to Chatzar collapsed. So you're not talking about an Eruv of chatzeres. You're talking about if the walls collapse. So if the walls collapse, it becomes now a Rosh Hashanah. Right, so this nusach that the Tana is saying is not a blanket rule across the board. It's referring to a specific case. So in fact, it's exactly what you said, that you had a keter at the beginning of Shabbos, even though the circumstances changed, that would not have allowed us to make an Eruv because now the door is locked. But since there was a heter at the beginning of Shabbos, that heter carries throughout the whole Shabbos. Which really, that's exactly how you learned the Chila. I hear. That's a good hour. The Gemara is going to actually even be marred by another case because it says Zak Klal even before the call. So you're saying Kol Mineu Bey should mean more than just the case specified. I hear. It's a good hour. So what does the Gemara say? Kol Shod Luk Shabbos Mutal Kol Shabbos when Eruv Derech Pesach the Nistam Pesach, or Eruv Derech Chaloin the Nistam Chaloin. Now that's the case of Kol Shemutal Limits of Shabbos. And maybe the Kol is Sai Pesach and Sai Chaloin, but that's not mistaber because halachically they're identical. Zaklal, let's see. But in fact, it says Zaklal, it must also be referring to an additional case with a larger chiddush than what we're saying with this door that got closed. And that is a mobui shenitlu kairoisov oilechio. You have a mobui. Normally, even though you make shitufim mavuyos, you also have to have either a lechi or a koyer at the entrance to the mobui from the Rosh Hashanah. Well, what if in fact you had that before Shabbos, and on Shabbos the lechi fell down, or the koyer fell down? From this brisa is telling us that it's not a problem. As long as when Shabbos arrived, the lechi and the koyer were there, you can continue carrying in that mode. So that's the first half of the brisa. Then the second half of the brisa says, Kol shenesar lemikzah Shabbos, anything that was usher at the beginning of Shabbos, like Chaim Tzvi explains, nesar lechol Shabbos kula. And what's an example of that? Kagoin Shnei Batim, we just had this case on Samach Vov. Kagoin Shnei Batim, the Shnei Tzidi Rosh Hashanah. Eruvin and Shimon lived across the street from each other, across a Rosh Hashanah street from each other. So there's no Havamina that they could make an Eruv together. They're on opposite ends of the street, on opposite sides of the street, with a Rosh Hashanah between them. But then the Kipum Nachrim Mechitza B'Shabbos. And then on Shabbos, Goy made a wall between, we had two blood ago. It's exactly this case. We had exactly this case. So that was at the beginning of Shabbos. This case was a case that was asked. It was a child that was asked, and the Gemara said, Aliba the Shmuel, who holds that you cannot make a Eruv from that people from Chatzar A cannot be mevatel the rights to Chatzar B on Shabbos. This is not a shaila, because there was no Eruv here. The question is could the person on one side of the street be mevatel his rights to his chotzer to the fellow on the other side of the street, and now at least one of them can carry there. So the Gemara said there, according to Shmuel, that you could never be mevatel from one chotzer to another chotzer. This is not a shaila. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that you could be mevatel from one chotzer to the next chotzer, do you say you could do it no matter what, or do you only say it if you would have been able to do it before Shabbos? But since in this case, before Shabbos there were no walls, and before Shabbos there was an actual Rosh Hashanah between them, and now on Shabbos it changed, what would be the halacha? And the psak halacha that was said 2 while ago was right off the bat, you cannot do it. But that's how you were learning in this brisa itself. So what the brisa is referring to is Shnei Bat and Shnei Tini Rosh Hashanah, the Kufa Nachem, Mechita b'Shabbos. So the reality changed on Shabbos. Nevertheless, you would not be able to be mevatel from one to the next on Shabbos because before Shabbos they couldn't have made a meal. Now, what's interesting to note is it only says Zah Klal once before the first case of whatever's mutter at the beginning of Shabbos is mutter al Shabbos. But Rashi says that since the Zah Klal is the heading and it's referring to all of the cases in the Brisa, we also have to find a yiter or another case that would be included on the Tzara Isser as well. So Lasuya Meis Nachri b'Shabbos, which incidentally, this is the second shaila on Samach Vav Amud Aleph. There was 2 shailas that were asked, and these are 2 shailas that were asked back to back. I'm sorry, I believe it was Samach Zayin Amud Aleph. Let me just look at the Gemara to refresh my memory. To the shailas that were asked, was all right, these are the shailas that Rav Chisda asked Rav Sheshes. They were trembling when they would meet each other. So Rav Chisda asked Rav Sheshes these 2 shailas. The first shailah he asked was, when there are 2 houses on the opposite sides of the Rosh Hashanah, and on Shabbos the goy made a wall around it, could they be mevatel? And the second shailah he asked was if the Nachri died on Shabbos. So the halacha was if there's 2 yidden in the chutzner and then there was a goy, so they can't make an erev. There's a goy there; they have to rent it from him. But what if the goy died on Shabbos? Can they then be mevatel one to another? And in both cases, Rav Sheshes paskin that it's not allowed. So let's see what Argamor is actually learning these 2 halachas directly into the brisa. So Zeklal Lasuyim Meis Nachi b'Shabbos. If the Nachi died on Shabbos, you cannot make bittul now again because this is a scenario you couldn't have done it before. Vikatani, and then the brisa continues on and says Chutz mimavatel rishus. A mavatel rishus would not have that problem. In other words, a mevatel rishus could be mevatel rishus on Shabbos. So Rashi says Chutz mimavatel rishus sheshakach v'le'ir. They forgot to make an erev before Shabbos. She'aval b'shen nasel l'mitzvah Shabbos. In a case where Reuben and Shimon both had homes in the chutzner, and they didn't make an erev before Shabbos. Meaning, when Shabbos arrived, it was usher. They were not allowed to carry. But the Brisa says, "Chutz mevatel rishus," bittul does work. Yesh lo according to Rashi, the Shabbos, because Reuben can be mevatel his rights to Shimon. That's the classic case of bittul. But it only lists off one case, Chutz mevatel rishus. The Brisa doesn't say that a Yerush could do that as well. With the loikatani Chutz mishabitel rishus the Yerush. What about a Yerush? A Yerush at the beginning of Shabbos it was also to carry in this chutzner because the father didn't make it there, and later on the Yerush made. How come it doesn't say that that's also an example of where bittul works? Shmami no Yerush lo. So from here, from the fact that the Brisa didn't list off bittul rishus and a Yerush as a second example of when, even though it was also at the beginning of Shabbos, through this bittul you can make a mutter. It should be a raya that a Yerush doesn't work. So it says the Ketani Chutz Mevatel Rishus of the Gemara, Iu in Yerush like. So you have a raya that a Yerush would not be able to do Mevatel Rishus. So the Gemara, it's not a raya. Eime Chutz Mitoyrish Bittul Rishus. Maybe what the Brisa means is the only place where you have a case where it was also the beginning of Shabbos and it becomes mutter on Shabbos is when you're using the method of bittul. Now, wherever the method of bittul works, that's all included in the one category of the method of bittul. So in fact, maybe it is referring to a Yerush because a Yerush would also be able to use the method of bittul. So we're behandling the shaila of a Yerush. So far we tried to bring one raya, it was not a good raya. So let's try another raya. Esvei. Echad mibnei chatzar shemes. A person, lo yaleinu, lived in a chatzar and he passed away. V'yaniach rishusai le'echad min hashuk. And he left over his estate, not to somebody who lives in that chatzar, somebody who lives elsewhere in a different area. So the halach is, if he died, if this person died before Shabbos arrived, oyser, then it will be osir. Meaning, the Yerush, who is not part of this chutzner, who did not make an heir with anybody in this chutzner, took possession, he yarshed this property before Shabbos. So coming into Shabbos, there's a resident or there's an owner here in this chutzner that was not part of there. But Misha Chashecha, if this person only died after Shabbos arrived, meaning he was already part of the Eruv when Shabbos arrived, then Eina Oyser, the fact that he died on Shabbos and now somebody owns this property who's not part of the Eruv, that doesn't answer. And Rashi speaks out, Sharai Hutur Limit to Shabbos. This falls right into that category. That since at the beginning of Shabbos, this culture, everybody in this culture had an Eruv, just because someone dies and now the new owner does not have an Eruv, that will not cause a problem. Correct. Even if nobody knew about it, even if the Yerush wasn't aware yet. That's right. Even if he didn't know. What if this property was owned by somebody, but he didn't, live there? So he had a house there, but he didn't live there, which means to say he wasn't ma'arav with them. So you had someone who owned the house in the culture that was not ma'arav with the other people in the culture, and he died. And he left over his house in this chutzner to somebody who actually was already part of the Eruv. So the halach is miboijoy bein oyser. If he died before Shabbos, he wouldn't answer. Why? Because before Shabbos, the house was already taken over by somebody who was in the chutzner who actually joined the Eruv with the rest of the people in the chutzner. But Mishach HaShecha, if he died after Shabbos arrived, meaning when Shabbos arrived there was no Eruv, and therefore it would have been usher to carry, then oyser. I don't understand. Am I oyser? If you all the Yerush could make bittul, am I oyser? Niftal. Let the Yerush, if the Yerush could be mevatel on Shabbos, let the Yerush be mevatel, and then it shouldn't be usher. Elamai, you have a raya that a Yerush cannot be mevatel. So tomorrow, my oyser nami dekatani achi yevatel. It doesn't mean it's usher and bittul doesn't help. It means bittul would be required. But in the case where the person died on Shabbos, no bittul is even required because when Shabbos came in, the Eruv was valid. Tashma, Yisrael v'ger shuruyim b'mugurachas. So this is another example of where you would need Eruv Chetzeros. The classic case that we've always discussed is individual homes in the chutzner. But in fact, in the Megura, which is a goyrin, they also had little individual spaces that shared an open courtyard, almost like a space that you would rent in an office building. So it was a living space, of course. It was a living space. It wasn't a typical culture. It was in a goyrin where each individual had a private apartment and they shared a chutzner together. So of course they also would need Eruv Chetzeros. So Yisrael v'ger shuruyim b'mugurachas. A Yisrael and a ger live together. So in this case, the Yisrael would have made a Eruv with the ger. Umeis ger mibojoy, and the ger died mibojoy. So a ger is different because a ger doesn't have automatic yerushin. A ger, it's first come, first served. So let's see what happens. So Yisrael and the ger live together. Umeis ger mibojoy, and the ger died on Friday afternoon. So who's getting over his chelik? Afal pi shehichsik Yisrael acher b'nechasov. Even though now let's stop a second. If a ger died and no one was machzik in his nechasov, would there be a problem for the yider? Absolutely not. Now he's the sole owner. He's the sole renter. It's great. If someone else is machzik, that's when trouble starts because now there's another person here that could create issue. So the Brisa here uses a very counterintuitive nusach. The Brisa says, Af al pi shehechzik Yisrael acher v'nechasov, even though somebody else was machzik in his nechasim, oyser it's also. Now, right out of the gate, this doesn't make any sense. It's to the contrary. If anything, you'll say, it's only it's only if somebody else showed up, it should be also. But if nobody else showed up, it shouldn't be also. So this avapi will not make sense. And in a moment, the Gemara is going to explain what this nusach is with a chesur mechser. What if someone only came? So what if the ger only died on Shabbos? So when Shabbos started, there was a proper eruv. So then, even though nobody was machzik, it wouldn't nasser. Again, it doesn't make sense. It's only if it's lo hichzik Yisrael acher ein oiser. If somebody else would have been machzik, that's when there's a problem. So in both cases, the nusach of this brisa is difficult to understand. This brisa minei ubei doesn't make any sense. Armit, you first said miboy joy. If the ger died before Shabbos, even though somebody else came and was machzik in it, it still is going to be usher. And it's for sure going to be usher if no one came to grab and be koine the ger's chelik in this property. Adirabba, if nobody else came to be machzik, then the yid's here by himself. There it shouldn't be usher. So what must be pshat? Amar Papa, Ema Aval Pisha Lo Yichzik. Saying what the Brisa means is if the ger died even though nobody was machzik, it's still going to be usher. That's a very nice shot, but it doesn't say that. Well, the Brisa doesn't say that. You can't willy-nilly just change the words. Dr. Marhachi Kamer, this is what the Brisa means to say. If the ger died Erev Shabbos, even though, and then somebody was machzik, but the person who came to be machzik was not machzik it before Shabbos, he was only machzik it on Shabbos. So when Shabbos arrived, there was nobody else here. So you would think that it should be mutter, because when Shabbos arrived, the goy had died, nobody had taken over the goy's chelik, so the Yisrael is the only person there. And when Shabbos arrived, he was the only person there. So logic should dictate that it should be mutter, because when Shabbos arrived, there was nobody to make an eruv with. Zok the brisa, even though nobody was machzik keeping the havalei lahachzik mibojoim, since it was available for anybody to come and chap it already mibojoim, because the ger died Friday afternoon. Therefore, oyser it'll usher anyway. So now the brisa makes perfect sense. So if we look back to the brisa, I'll just mish back to the Amud Beis. It says as follows: Yisrael beger Shiruyim b'Megur Achas, who may scare me by John. The ger died on Friday. Aval pi, that the Yisrael was machzik only at night and not by day, because by day when Shabbos arrived, there was only one person who had rights to this whole area. Nevertheless, it's still going to be usher. Why? Because since the ger died by John, it was open to anybody to come and be machzik in it, and that is enough to cause a problem. I'm sorry? No, I think he has to be machzik in this ger's personal place. There's two apartments. If the Yisrael wasn't machzik in the ger's apartment, so it's still up in the air. I don't have to do that actually. Yeah. No, because if you were machzik before Shabbos, you didn't make an eruv. This new person who was machzik didn't make an eruv with the other guy. Yeah, if the guy was machzik before Shabbos and he made an eruv with me, sure, there's no problem. Here, the new guy who was machzik never made an eruv with me. So since the guy could have been machzik already in the rishus of this ger before Shabbos, even though he didn't, we look at it as if he did. In other words, it's not magic. Chazal is makbid. In such a case, you wouldn't be able to be carried. going into Shabbos, it was beheter because there was no one else. There was no other. Right. So the answer to that is keeping the havel the hachzik in the joint. Chazal say that since someone could have been machzik in the boyjoint, even though he didn't, it's still going to be also. Again, this is not choshen mishpat. This is how the Rabbanim set up the requirements of Erev Chateres. They saw it fit that in such a case, since everyone knows this is up for grabs, they looked at it like it was already a piece of property that people were sharing, and they said that you would need an Erev in such a case.
Yosy, what was the time of death?
One second, I keep him. 1 second. Nechi's asking something. I mean, the person who actually lived there could have been Max B'Vor, but because he ultimately wasn't. Maybe if he ultimately was Machzik in it, maybe then it wouldn't have been a problem. But since he ultimately wasn't Machzik in it, it was somebody else, and that somebody else could have already come before Shabbos, maybe that's why Chazal thought that it's considered a chutzner of Shutrim, and there was no error. If the Yisrael that was living there was Machzik, yeah, but he wasn't. He wasn't. And the Rabbanan made that distinction. And you're asking me, even if somebody else was Machzik on Shabbos, but who said he's the guy who would have been Machzik before Shabbos? Maybe it would be the guy that was there first. It's a good argument. Akiva, what are you saying?
No, I don't understand the chain of events here. What time did the ger die? What did the coroner say?
He died before Shabbos.
How much before Shabbos? You're saying Meboijam, he had the opportunity to be able to go be maknet. If he died a minute before Shabbos,
it could have been Huksat. It doesn't mean that he had not time to drive from wherever he was because I mean, since theoretically it was available for a third party to be koined, that's enough that the Rabbanan felt they should ask it. Oh, yeah, don't think just because he died 2 minutes before Shabbos, nobody could get it. You don't think 6 people were waiting there? There was a tailgate party.
I don't doubt that one of the Chevra Kadisha guys hopped it. That's the first thing they think of.
They get inside information.
Yeah,
they call that an IPO.
Right. No, but what I don't understand is that if he what was the in the guy's mind when he's machzik it? You're telling me so he went on Shabbos, and what was his mindset? To grab it on Shabbos, he could be koined on Shabbos? You're allowed to be koined on
question. Are you allowed to go be machzik in Nichseger on Shabbos?
Right.
That's
if you can't do it.
But we're talking about what happened.
Because there's a Kenyan work on Shabbos, you can make
I'm about to be koined a property worth $1 million. I don't care if this guy can carry his Shabbos. You know, when I applied for a zoning variance to build my house there, I'll pay him off at that time, even though he'll still remember that I messed up one Shabbos that he couldn't carry. He was going to give a kiddush that Shabbos, and because of me, he can't give kiddush. Who was he going to give kiddush to anyway? He was there by himself, with himself.
We learned before that when somebody dies and the guy is koine is rishus, even without his das, he's koine, right? The Yarshim are koine, right?
A Yerush.
A Yerush is koine.
So a Yerush is automatically koine. He doesn't have to make a kinyan. But a machzik b'nichseger has to be koine.
Okay.
So you want the halacha l'maisa, was he allowed to do it? I don't know. But
yeah, what I'm thinking, what I'm saying is it's irrelevant really, because if he can't make a kinyan, if he can't make the kinyan post Shabbos that was there, what's the difference?
But he could make
only focus on the fact that there was opportunity before Shabbos. What happens afterwards is almost irrelevant. Why does it matter what happens afterwards?
I'm not on it. If he never made a kinyan, and no one ever made a kinyan on this karka, it would be very relevant. That's right, then it wouldn't be a problem. So it's only relevant if somebody came on Shabbos and then machzik on it. Do you say now that it's usher? But if let's say nobody came to claim the land at all, then there shouldn't be a problem needing an eruv because there was no other interest in that chutzner all throughout Shabbos.
Okay, Seder.
But that's only if it got filled. That's only if the guy showed up. The guy never showed up. That doesn't say that would be the law. So let's see what this is. What if the ger only died on Shabbos? So what does the Brisa say? Even though nobody was machzik, ain't no Yisrael doesn't answer. Correct the word, the same thing. You're telling me there, even though somebody wasn't machzik, it's only if he wasn't machzik. If someone was machzik, then for sure it should be mutter. By somebody else being koined, that creates the problem. Amar Papa, Ema, the same thing. It means even though somebody was machzik, it's mutter. In fact, the Amar of he doesn't say that. Even though the person only was koined after Shabbos arrived, which means at the time that Shabbos arrived, there was no other owner here. Since he could not have been machzik by join, because in this case the ger was still alive before Shabbos, therefore ain't no Yosy. So that's the brisa. Now the Gemara wants to extract the shaila of Yerush, because that's really why we quoted this brisa to paskin on the shaila of Yerush. But telling me is Reisha Yosy. In the Reisha, the fact that somebody else was koined in the Nichsei Ger, since he could have been koined before Shabbos, he's going to answer his interest in this property, answers everybody from carrying. Let this new owner who was machzik just be mevatel l'schela. And the Gemara here is learning that a machzik l'nichsei ger should be no different than the Irish. He stands in the place of the original owner of the ger. So niftal. So the Gemara, my oisher to katani achi yiftal, avadi could be mevatel. We're just saying is that he would create Isser if he wasn't mevatel. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, the Mishnah is going to the Shammai that we just learned in the Mishnah. The Amri Ein Bittel Rishus b'Shabbos. Bittel never works on Shabbos. It's not in our Mishnah. Meimasei Noisen Rishus. The Shammai Amim the Joim. V'Sil Amim Misha Techshach. Once Shabbos arrives, you could no longer be Mevatel Rishus. Amar Ula, my time of the Beisil. What's the svar of Beisil will hold that you could be Mevatel Rishus on Shabbos? Nasik Omer Kalach Eitzel Yafes. What time is Shabbos? 55. 7, or should we have a couple of seconds? Okay. Kalach Etziopis is an interesting case. What happens if I told somebody, do me a favor, take Truma for me? I have a whole pile of tevel. Could you take Truma for me? And what did he do? He took some really, really good produce to give for Truma. Maybe I wouldn't be so happy about it. He didn't have to give such good stuff. He gave away best stuff. So if when the guy comes back and he sees that his shliach took really high grade product and gave it for Truma, he said, what's the matter? He couldn't find anything better. So the question is that a sarcastic comment or is that a sincere comment? So the halacha is, if in fact he had even better stuff than the guy gave, then you don't look at it like a sarcastic comment. He was sincere. I wanted to give the best thing to the kohanim. You could have given even nicer. So if that's the case, then avad the Truma's call. But if when he said Kalach Eitzel Yafos, he really didn't have anything better, which would in fact indicate that the Balabas was saying it in a sarcastic fashion, couldn't find anything better, that means he's not happy with what he did. So if from my comments you see I am happy because I had something better when I said why don't you give better, the Truma is a good Truma. So Beisil wants to say, since if I'm a vatal on Shabbos, it shows that I wanted to create a heter to carry. And that probably was my mindset before Shabbos. That's why they still allows bittul on Shabbos. Because that means my mindset is probably that I always wanted us to be able to carry it.
Isn't there a pasuk that says you're supposed to give from the best for Truma? I seem to remember that there's such a pasuk.
You probably should give the best, but that doesn't mean you have to, and it doesn't mean that this guy wanted to.
Okay, but it seems that there's a chiyuv too. Okay.
I don't know. So what is the question? Amar Baye, Meis Nachi b'Shabbos. By Meis Nachi b'Shabbos, my Kalach Eitzel Yafos Ika. There, you wouldn't be able to take Kalach Eitzel Yafos because the person taking over, he didn't even own it then. So you can't say that his das was already to create a heter to carry before Shabbos because he wasn't around before Shabbos. So that cannot be pshat in why Beis Hillel allows you to be mevatel rishus even on Shabbos. The Shammai holds when you're being mevatel rishus, it actually is a stickle kinyan, but it's not a real kinyan. Rashi is only doima to memkar. It's perceived more as a kinyan. Umikne reshus of Shabbos aser. So the Rabbanan wouldn't have said that you would even do this symbolic bittul reshus on Shabbos because kinyan is also on Shabbos. It's not even resembling the kinyan. It's just what Chazal prescribed you're supposed to do, but not that it actually resembles a kinyan. It's to look at reshus of Shabbos, and this type of activity you would be allowed to do on Shabbos.